Province, 2011. 4 minutes from the compound wall, Squadron Sergeant Major Connor Reyland has his hand up and the file behind him has stopped moving because the man on point has just heard something in his earpiece that changes the entire shape of the next 4 minutes. The ground here is nothing like the last war. No streetlight, no traffic noise to mask a footstep, just irrigation ditches and grape rows and a compound wall 30 meters off that his team has rehearsed against a scale model twice a day for the better part of a week. He can smell wood smoke from somewhere behind the wall, and under it something colder. Wet mud and the particular mineral smell of a country that has been fought over by more armies than anyone still living can list from memory. The target picture says 6 fighters, one of them a bomb maker they've chased for 2 months, light security, a single sentry on the roof. Reyland has run the numbers 100 times in his head on the walk-in, the way he runs every number before a door goes. The compound layout, the sentry's likely position, the seconds it will take his breacher to get through a gate that photographs from 3 weeks ago showed as timber, not steel. He trusts the picture. He has never had cause not to. The voice in his ear belongs to someone he has never met and has been told almost nothing about, relaying a correction that arrived 40 minutes ago from a position closer to that wall than any drone has ever been able to hold. And it is this. The gate is still now, reinforced this week, and there are children sleeping in the room his breacher was about to put a charge against. Reyland changes the plan in the space of a breath, the way a man changes a plan when the alternative is unthinkable rather than merely inconvenient. It costs them 90 seconds. Those 90 seconds are the reason nobody in that compound dies who wasn't already supposed to. He will not learn the name of the voice for another 11 days. When he does, it will not be the first time it has saved him. It will be the second, and the first time 5 years earlier in a different country, he never even said thank you. To understand why that voice mattered more than anything, a helicopter, a drone, or 130 men with rifles could have given him, you have to go back further than either war. Back to a unit that neither of these 2 wars actually created, though both of them would come to depend on it more than either wanted to admit. The regiment that put a voice in Reyland's ear that night in Helmand was stood up on the 6th of April 2005 at Sandhurst, with a ceremony almost nobody outside a small circle in Whitehall was told about. It was not built for Iraq and it was not built for Afghanistan, not directly. It grew out of the 2002 Strategic Defense Review's quiet admission that the SAS and SBS were spending too much of their time watching things instead of doing the work only they could do, and that somebody else needed to own the watching. Its lineage ran back further still, to a unit called 14 Intelligence Company, the DET, built in Belfast in the worst years of the Troubles to walk unarmed or barely armed into rooms full of people who would have killed them for less than an accent, and come out again having learned everything and given away nothing. Men and women who had spent a decade perfecting the particular skill of being forgettable in a city that killed strangers for being noticed had, by 2005, become too valuable a discipline to keep improvised. The war in Iraq was already 3 years old. Afghanistan was entering its 4th, both of them, without anyone in either theatre quite planning it that way, were about to become the proving ground for a regiment built somewhere else entirely, for a different enemy in a different decade. The regiment that inherited that habit was called the Special Reconnaissance Regiment. Nobody wore its cap badge in public. Nobody printed its casualties in a paper you could buy at a newsstand. It recruited from every corner of the armed forces, men and women both, and it asked of them a specific and unglamorous kind of courage, not the courage of a door going in, but the courage of standing in a market for 6 hours with a shopping bag, memorizing a face, and walking home without once looking like a man who had memorized anything at all. It was not built for either of the wars Reyland fought in. It simply happened to be exactly ready when both of them needed something neither the SAS nor the SBS had ever been built to give. Baghdad, 2006. Reyland is 28 years old and has been badged into the regiment for 3 years, attached now to Task Force Black, hunting the network cells feeding the bombs that are killing soldiers and civilians in roughly equal measure across a city that no longer looks from the inside of an armored vehicle like it belongs to the century it's in. He is very good at his job. He has been told this by men whose opinion he respects, and he has come to believe it the way a man believes a fact he has personally tested many times and never once found wanting. He meets the SRR detachment attached to the task force in a converted classroom inside the Green Zone compound, a handful of them dressed like nobody. One in a taxi driver's dish dasher gone soft with wear, one in a labourer's overalls with a genuine oil stain on the knee, none of them carrying anything Reyland would call a proper weapon. There is a whiteboard on the wall still bearing the ghost of a multiplication table from whatever school this building used to be, and nobody has bothered to wipe it clean because nobody in this room has ever cared what the room looks like. He is introduced to a woman called Nia, mid-20s, unremarkable in every visible way that Reyland will only later understand is the entire point of her, who nods once and goes back to a laptop covered in a film of dust she has clearly stopped noticing. "You're the eyes," he says to her, not unkindly, meaning it as something between a compliment and a dismissal, and gets the ghost of a smile in return, nothing more. He does not think of himself as contemptuous of them. He thinks of himself as a professional who understands the shape of the work, assault, breach, close quarter, the things a soldier can be measured on because they leave a mark somebody can count, a mark you can point to in an after-action report and say, "There, that is what I did today." What Nia and her people do leaves no mark he knows how to read. A face memorized is not a statistic, a gate photographed 3 weeks running, so a pattern in the timber's replacement can be noticed is not a story anyone will ever tell in a mess hall. He watches her work exactly once, by accident rather than design, on a resupply run through a market district he has no operational reason to be in. She is 30 meters ahead of him on the far side of the street in the taxi driver's dish dasha, haggling over the price of oranges with the particular unhurried irritation of a man who does this every week and resents the inflation of it. And Reyland, who knows her face, very nearly does not recognize her at all, has to stop himself mid-stride and look twice, and even then isn't fully certain until she pays for the oranges in a handful of small notes counted out with the wrong-handed clumsiness of someone who has practiced being clumsy. She does not look at him. She does not need to. A boy, no older than 10, runs past her, close enough to brush her sleeve, chasing a football, and she moves half a step aside without breaking the rhythm of the haggling, the kind of small, automatic courtesy a real local gives without thinking. And it is that half step, more than anything else, that convinces Reyland he is watching a performance so complete it has stopped being one. He understands, watching her walk away with a bag of fruit into a crowd that has already forgotten she existed, that what he has just seen is not a woman buying oranges. It is 6 hours of a day spent becoming furniture, so thoroughly that even a man looking directly for her nearly walked past. The first operation he runs with her detachment's product behind it goes cleanly. The team stacks on a door at 0340, breacher forward, charge set against the lock. Reyland has been told correctly will give on the first strike rather than the second, a detail that saves them 4 seconds. Nobody in the stack will ever know they were given 4 seconds. That in this line of work is the difference between a clean entry and a man inside having time to reach for something under a mattress. The room clears in under a minute. 2 men down, 3 detained, a laptop and a stack of handwritten ledgers back before the first dog in the street has finished barking. 11 minutes, no shots fired at anyone who wasn't already reaching for a weapon. The target picture so accurate, his breacher doesn't so much as pause at the door. Reyland writes it up afterward in the flat, professional language of an after-action report as a well-planned assault executed to standard. He does not write the sentence that would have been more honest, which is that the plan had already been made for him 3 weeks earlier by a woman with a dusty laptop who he has, by that point, spoken to exactly twice. He tells himself, walking back to his own quarters that night, that the intelligence picture is somebody else's job and the execution is his, and that this division of labor is simply how the machine is built, and that there is no shame in a machine having different parts. He believes this. He continues to believe it for 5 more years, through 2 more rotations, through a promotion, through enough operations that the specific faces of the people who fed him his target pictures blur into a category rather than a memory. The watchers, he calls them once to a younger trooper, without cruelty and without much thought, the way a man names a tool he has never had to hold. The younger trooper, a corporal, barely 2 years badged, asks him once over a brew why the watchers don't just come on the assault if they know the ground so well. Reyland laughs, not unkindly, and says they're not built for it, same as a sniper isn't built to carry a machine gun, and the corporal nods and never asks again, and Reyland never once considers that the question might have been the more interesting one to sit with rather than answer. He does not see Nia again in Iraq. He does not think about her again either. Not really. Not until a night on a ridge in Helmand 5 years later, when a voice in his earpiece stops him 90 seconds short of a mistake he would have carried for the rest of his life. Helmand, 2011. Reyland is a squadron sergeant major now, 33, 3 tours, deep into a second war that looks nothing like the first one. No city block grid, no green zone, just compounds and grape rows and irrigation ditches, and a population caught between 2 armies, neither of which it fully trusts. The task force he's attached to has an SRR detachment working the district, and this time he is senior enough that he actually reads the products they produce rather than simply acting on plans built from them. He starts, without quite admitting it to himself, to notice the shape of the work in a way he never let himself notice it in Baghdad. He learns, third hand, over weeks, in the scattered way a man learns anything about a unit that does not exist on paper the way his does, what a single SRR operator's day in this district actually looks like. It looks like walking the market at the same hour, 3 days running, buying the same amount of bread each time until the bread seller stops registering the purchase as anything worth mentioning to anyone. It looks like sitting still in a ditch for 11 hours in daylight, close enough to a compound wall to hear individual voices through it without a rifle that could do anything more than keep the operator alive for the 90 seconds it would take for the whole operation to be blown if they were ever found. It looks like memorizing the exact pattern of a gate's construction so that when 3 men rebuild it in reinforced steel over the course of a single week, someone notices and flags it, and the flag travels up a chain that ends 40 minutes before a raid in Reyland's earpiece. He hears 2 about the operation that never happened, the one that would have gone in 3 days before the raid that opened this story. On a compound the drone feed showed as sparsely occupied and the target picture called low risk. It was cancelled at the 11th hour on the word of a single SRR report, unverified by anything a satellite could see, that named the compound as a family home, mistakenly cross-referenced with an old address the network had long since abandoned. Nobody in the operations room that night knew whose call it had been to trust a single uncorroborated report over 8 separate technical feeds. Reyland finds out weeks later that it was hers. 11 men who would have gone through that door are alive today, on both sides of a war that will never know their names because a raid that should have happened on paper never happened at all. And there is no medal for a door that stayed closed, no citation for a body count that correctly reads 0 because it was never supposed to read anything else. He asks, eventually quietly, who the voice belongs to. He is told, in the careful, incomplete way these things are told, that it is the same detachment that supported his task force outside Baghdad 5 years ago, and that one of the operators currently working this district was there then too. He does not get a name. He does not need one. He already knows with a certainty that arrives all at once, rather than gradually, that it is her. He asks to meet her, and the request travels through channels he does not control. And 3 days later, he is standing in a plywood room not unlike the one in Baghdad, and Nia is sitting across from him with the same dust-covered laptop, 5 years older, and the same ghost of a smile. "Squadron Sergeant Major now?" she says, not quite a question, more an observation offered aloud. "You remember me," he says, and hears, as he says it out loud, how strange the sentence sounds. As though it were a favour she'd done him being remembered, when the truth running the other direction is so much larger he doesn't yet have the words for it. "I remember the compound in 06 quite clearly," she says. "You called us the Eyes." He does not have anything to say to that for a moment. He had meant it at the time as something close to a compliment, hearing it repeated back to him 5 years later in a room where he now understands what her eyes actually cost her to keep open. It sounds like the smallest thing a man has ever said to the person who kept him alive. "I never said thank you," he says. "For 06, I didn't know enough to say it." "You weren't meant to know enough," she says. "That's rather the point of us. How long were you standing on that market street before I nearly walked straight past you?" She thinks about it, or pretends to, the way people do when they've long since stopped counting hours the ordinary way. "Long enough that the oranges stop being a cover story," she says. "You get to a point where you're not performing the life anymore. You're just living an extra one alongside your own for as long as the job needs it. Then you put it down and go back to being yourself, and the strange part isn't the pretending. It's how easy the putting down gets after a while." He sits with that for a long moment. He has, across 9 years of soldering, kept a private tally, scratched with a knife point into the inside seam of his belt kit, of every confirmed action his own hands were part of. A habit that started as a young trooper's private scoreboard and never quite stopped, long after he told himself it meant nothing. He has never once thought to ask himself what a tally would look like for a woman whose entire discipline is built around leaving no mark that could ever be scratched into anything. There is no notch for a gate noticed. There is no notch for a bread seller who stopped looking twice. There is no notch, in fact, for the single largest thing she has ever done for him. The raid that never launched 3 days before this conversation because she flagged a target picture as wrong when 8 technical feeds said it was right. Doesn't it bother you? He asks. That none of it gets counted anywhere? It gets counted, she says. Just not by anyone who was meant to see the counting. That's the whole arrangement. You lot get remembered. We get to still be alive to watch you get remembered, which some weeks feels like the better half of the deal. I've spent 5 years thinking I was the one keeping people alive, he says, mostly to himself. You were, she says. You still are. I just make sure you're keeping the right ones. He does not have an answer for that either. He thinks on the walk back to his own quarters that night about the tally in his belt kit, and for the first time in 9 years, he thinks about scratching a line into it for something he did not do with his own hands. The compound that stayed standing, the children who were never in danger because the plan changed in the space of a breath, 90 seconds that cost nothing and saved everything, built entirely out of work that will never appear in an after-action report with his name on it, work that in fact appears in no report he will ever be permitted to read. He does not scratch the line. He understands, finally, sitting on the edge of his cot with the belt kit in his hands, that this is exactly the wrong instinct. The same instinct that made him call her the eyes in the first place, the reflex to convert a debt into something countable, something that fits inside his own private system for measuring what a soldier is worth. Her work was never going to fit inside that system. It was never built to. That is not a flaw in the accounting. That is the entire reason the accounting exists in the first place, so that a man who breaks doors for a living can go on believing the door was the hardest part, while somewhere behind him, invisible, unthanked, uncounted, someone made absolutely certain it was the right door. He thinks about the younger trooper who once asked him over a brew in Baghdad why the Watchers didn't just come on the assault, and he understands, 5 years too late to say it to the right person, that the honest answer was never, they're not built for it. The honest answer was that they were doing something harder, in a different currency entirely, and he simply hadn't yet developed the instrument to weigh it. He finishes his tour. He is promoted again and again, and ends his career eventually as a training officer, the man or the men are sent to when they need the swagger taken off their confidence. And he tells this story exactly once, decades later, to a room of young troopers about to deploy for the first time, and he tells it without naming her because that was never his to give away, and he ends it with the only sentence he has ever found that carries the whole weight of what she taught him. The SAS will get you through the door, he says. But somebody else, a long time before you ever see that door, already decided which one you were walking through and whether anyone innocent was standing behind it. You will never know their name. You will never see their face twice, even if you're stood right next to them in a market and looking directly at it. If you're good at your job, one day you'll realize you were never the hardest part of it. A hand goes up in the third row. A young trooper, sharp enough to sense there's a name being deliberately withheld and bold enough to ask for it anyway. Reyland looks at him for a long moment, weighing exactly how much of the truth belongs to a room full of men who haven't earned it yet, and deciding, finally, that the answer is almost none of it, and that this too is a kind of lesson worth teaching. There's a regiment, he says, that most of you will serve alongside a dozen times and never once know it. You won't get a name, you're not meant to. Just remember, the next time a target picture arrives on your kit looking too clean, too complete, too convenient to have come from a drone alone, somebody walked past that compound in daylight, unarmed, and decided you were allowed to trust it. Give them the thanks I never gave mine, even though they'll never hear it, and even though they'd probably tell you not to bother. He does not tell them about the tally in his belt kit, which by then has not gained a single new line in over a decade, not because nothing worth counting happened, but because he finally understood on a cot in Helmand in 2011 that the truest kind of soldiering in that war was never going to be the kind that left the mark he knew how to make.